Hey there, bedroom producers. I wanted to talk to you for a few minutes today about the first mix. The first mix once you've completed recording all of your tracks. And I'll be repeating a lot of what I've talked about in the past, but I can't stress enough how important some of these ideas are. So for me, this first mix tends to be pretty quick. I might spend an hour, and when you sit down to mix, you probably shouldn't spend too much time each session anyway, because you start to fatigue and you start to miss things that you would otherwise catch if you were fresh. So remember, when you're mixing, there's a really good order to do things in, and maybe it's different for everybody, but everybody should sort of have a plan when you go into the mix. And for me, I like to start with volume, with levels. So remember, I've done a lot of edits to these tracks as I'm recording because especially when I record vocals, I want things to sound good behind me. But really, this applies to any instrument. If I'm recording a guitar track, I don't want the bass to sound crappy. So you'll notice there's a little bit of EQ and compression on the bass. So when I recorded my guitar tracks, the bass already sounded somewhat good. Of course, there's a lot more to be done with this mix. But once I've finished recording my tracks and it's time to really dive into the mix, the first thing I address is levels. And the truth is, if you can get a good mix by simply adjusting levels, you should do that. If there's no need to use EQ or compression, you shouldn't. I mean, you shouldn't add anything to the mix that doesn't improve it somehow. And sometimes, again, that's hard to tell if you've been mixing for an hour, so take breaks. But this is the first mix after I finished recording all these tracks. These last 4 tracks here, the vocal tracks, were finished sometime last week, and I finally sat down to start mixing. Not just these little EQ cuts here and there, but seriously mixing. And the way that I like to do it is to start with the loudest part of the song and to pull things down. So I'll find the track that is the loudest in the loudest part of the song, and kind of bring everything, I should say, the track that should be the loudest, and kind of bring everything down around it, because I find it's better to pull things down than up if I can help it. There's less risk of clipping later on if I'm constantly pulling things down, and you can always add back gain. But once you're clipping, you can't undo that. So this part of the song right here is sort of the densest. You can see there's 4 vocal tracks, 3 guitar parts, and it's, dense, heavy guitar. There's bass and the drums. So I started with this, and I got this all kind of mixed. Just forgetting about the rest of the song, I just made sure that these tracks were balanced. And then what I like to do is go back to the beginning of the song, and with everything adjusted around that loudest part, I start making changes, automation changes to the levels. And I do this piece by piece. So I start with this right here. That's one quote-unquote section of the song. And I make changes. I make automation edits so that nothing over here changes. This all stays the same. So you can see these little nodes here. and then I move on to the next section. And by the way, as I go into each section, so let's say we're here in this section, what you might call section 2, I like to mix from the top down. I've organized these tracks in such a way that this is easy. I know how I like to build a song, and I like to do it from the most rhythmic instrument in the song to the least. And to me, the drums are the most rhythmic instrument in any rock or pop song, just about any rock or pop song, certainly in my music. So I start with the electronic drums up here and the real drums, and I get those all balanced with each other. And then the bass is next, because to me, the bass is the next most rhythmic instrument in a song. It very closely follows the kick drum typically. And I kind of go from there. My samples and keyboard instruments tend to be the next most rhythmic, and then guitars, and then vocals. Sometimes the guitars and the keys are reversed. It really depends on the song and how I feel like I might want to mix the song. But in this particular song, I just felt like the keys were a little bit more rhythmic than the guitars. So this part is really easy because I just move from section to section. And, if we keep on going, you'll see there's about 11 quote unquote sections in this song. And I just go from the top down, making these automation edits so that I don't mess with anything I've already adjusted. And a really good example of this is this guitar 1, which you might call you might call the rhythm guitar in this song. If you look closely, you can see it starts out at negative 21 decibels, and then that's a section. The song changes here. It goes from the intro to the first verse, and of course, there's your vocal for the first verse. And in section 2, which goes all the way out to about here, there's a couple of edits. So it's at negative 25, and then it's at negative 27, and so on and so forth. Section 3, it's back up to negative 20, so a little bit louder than section 1. And this goes all the way through the song. So if you look, there's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think I missed one in there, but there's roughly 10 or 11 of these short sections, maybe 15 seconds each, 10 to 20 seconds each. And people typically think of these sections as verses and choruses and intros and outros and bridges. But what we don't often think about when we're not producers is how the mix is really going to change from section to section. And I guess it doesn't have to. You really could set the levels the same throughout the song and just kind of find the best middle ground. But when you have the option to make these automation edits, why not? Why not try to get a tighter mix? And you can see I've done a lot of that. So this is my first mix through after finishing recording. One other thing you might notice is that some of the tracks have more automation edits than others, and I guarantee you by the time I get done with this, these vocal tracks are going to have the most. There's a reason for that, and the reason to me is that certain instruments shouldn't change in volume as much throughout the song. It's better if they can kind of hold down the fort and create a solid foundation for everything else to be built upon. And when it comes to drums, for instance, there's almost no edits, and the edits that there are really not about changing the levels so much as they are about muting things here and there. For the most part, these drums are the same volume from the beginning of the song to the end, each track. Same thing with the bass. No volume edits. There might be some by the time I'm done with the mix, but probably not. And so on and so forth. You can see there's more with the keys, slightly more with the guitars, and then, like I said, at some point I'll fine tune these vocals, and there will be automation nodes all the way across these tracks. So, the reason again for that is that certain instruments, again, in my opinion, the most rhythmic instruments are the ones that will kind of stay consistent in level throughout the song, and that helps to sort of create the illusion that there is stability in the song, when in reality there's really a lot that's changing. So to the listener, everything sounds nice and even from beginning to end, but when you look at this session, you can see that that's not really what's happening at all. Things are being turned up and back down constantly, but that's to create that illusion. So I hope this helps. Again, this is just my first mix through. This took me about an hour. Not all of these edits, not all of these plugins were done. Again, some of them were done during the recording phase, but for the most part, a lot of these volume edits were done during my first mix through, which again took about an hour. And then my next one will be about an hour-long session dealing with EQ, and then following that, I'll probably start doing my my sweetening. Compression is something I like to deal with during recording because it really it's a bit necessary in terms of getting things sounding good enough to record along with. But EQ is something that I typically wait until later to do because it can be somewhat time consuming and subjective, and it really depends on everything being there in the mix, so that you're not making mistakes and putting EQ cuts that you'll regret later or undo later. I like everything to be there recorded before I start touching EQ, except for some minor stuff here and there. So again, my next mix through will be about an hour of EQ stuff and then sweetening to finish it all off. And hopefully I'll be able to do another post on that one, maybe for the month of December. And I can show you how the sausage is made. So I hope that this helps. And if anybody has any questions, please let me know in the comments. Happy producing. See ya.